Do you remember the Dianne Feinstein showdown with those kids who wanted her to essentially sign on to, or at least remark on, the Green New Deal? Remember that whole back and forth in Feinstein's office? Well, our guest, Isha Clarke, was part of that incident or scene, or however you want to call that, conversation with Dianne Feinstein. But Isha's work goes way beyond that. But I just wanted to sort of hang it on for a moment, something that you might recall. Isha Clarke, welcome to the conversation.
Hey.
You're a legitimate high school student, isn't that right?
Yes, I am.
In fact, just to put this in context, I was told in setting up our little Skype thing, since you were in school, we set it up with your grandfather. He was the one who actually set the Skype up today.
Yes, he did.
I love that. I mean, I love that you are an activist at your young age. I'm sure you see your youth as a virtue, but I'm sure you also see, with so much future ahead of you, this climate situation that you have become so very active in talking about as a real threat to your life in other ways moving forward.
Definitely. I think it's become so huge that we can no longer ignore it. I mean, it's just crazy to think about that. Decades, we've known about this crisis for decades, far before I was born, and nothing was done about it. And so now we know that we have until 2030 to do something, and that's a little over 10 years, which is just crazy and scary to think about. But there has been a lot of incredible action and powerful people like myself and my peers who are standing up and really taking needed action.
And when you talk about the needed action, and we're seeing some pictures of the Sunrise Movement there, give us a feel for what that needed action is. Sort of, what is your activist agenda? What do you prioritize, and how do you move forward? Because I really feel like this youth movement may show the way for a lot of others who want to join in the same movement.
Mm-hmm. I think we've come to a point where we recognize that real change needs to be on a societal level. We can no longer just recycle or go vegan. Those things are great, and major props to everyone who's doing that. But it's come to a point where the action that we need is so radical that it has come down to a cultural shift. And that's in America, but that's also in the world. The climate crisis that we're in is a direct result of our societal culture of greed and white supremacy and economic exploitation. And so we need to really completely change how we live in the world. And I think that's the biggest fight for us.
I mean, there's no question, you're right. I mean, my God, the climate crisis and sort of the unabated, I should say unabated CO2 emissions and this sort of skid off the cliff that we're all watching. It's all the result of greed. It's all the result of this system, as you suggest. But I would ask again, that's a big ask to change that system, right? So how do you incrementally change that system while still respecting a pretty short timeline?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the Green New Deal is what everyone is talking about right now. And I think it's because it's really the only plan that takes seriously exactly what I just said, that we only have a little over 10 years to completely change everything that we've known, which is very scary and is a very bold task. And at the same time, keeping the integrity of everyone, keeping in mind economic justice and racial justice. And so the Green New Deal is a way to encompass all of that. We are creating hundreds and thousands of new green jobs. So people are being able to thrive. It helps our economy. It is giving Black and brown people jobs. And at the same time, it gives us that complete shift to a green world.
Very well said, of course. And the Green New Deal is part of a New Deal. And the original New Deal, the FDR's New Deal, employed a lot of people, and it reinvigorated this nation economically in many ways. And that same economic reinvigoration awaits if they could really get this Green New Deal off the dime. when people make fun of AOC and they make fun of the Green New Deal, you must hear and see a lot of that. What are your responses, and how do you counter sort of that negative propaganda coming back at you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I take my job as a revolutionary very seriously, and I recognize that there's no time to be angry at the negativity, and that at this point, I'm fueling all of the negative energy into changing the world, because I know that is my one task right now, and that should be the task of everyone. But if not everyone is ready to take on that responsibility, I accept that, and I take that energy and I push it towards changing the world.
Wow, that's a great way to be. I wish I could see. I knew that you'd say certain things that would resonate, and I would hope that I could use them maybe as strategies in my own life. That's one of them. How is the science in climate change? I know you guys, and I really applaud you for this, talk about the science, because that's important. I mean, the facts are all on your side.
Yeah. The October 2018 UN report said that we have until 2030 to make radical action towards changing the climate, or there will be irreversible impacts from climate change. And the science has been around for decades. And in fact, ExxonMobil was part of the movement, or I shouldn't say movement, but they were the people who did a lot of the research about climate change earlier on. And so we've known about this for a very long time, and we've let it sit, and it hasn't been one of our priorities. And now it's kind of built into this issue that we can no longer ignore. It's so big that no one can ignore it anymore.
It's interesting. You grew up and continue to live in Oakland, isn't that right? Northern California.
Born and raised.
And I'm wondering how this came to you. What was the thing that really lit a fire under you to be so active in this Sunrise movement?
Yeah, so I'm actually a part of a group, Youth versus Apocalypse, which is based in Oakland, but now is all over the Bay Area, or we have youth from all over the Bay Area. And we started as a group of young people fighting against a developer, Phil Tagami, who was trying to build a coal terminal through West Oakland. And he actually sued the city of Oakland to allow him to build this coal terminal. And so I started off in the fight against that. I actually live in West Oakland, and so I recognized how directly impacted I was, and a bunch of people that I love and my community members, and just recognizing that there's already super high rates of asthma in that community, and that is a reflection of many Black and brown low-income communities all over the country who are constantly targets for environmental injustice. And, there's a community, Piedmont, in Oakland, which is very white, very wealthy, and that is where Phil Tagami lives. And we make the comment that there would never be a coal terminal built through Piedmont. It just would never happen. And that communities like West Oakland are constantly targets for these kinds of horrible actions because they can get away with it.
That's such a great point. I mean, that you take a community of the sort that you're talking about, and people are barely getting by, if they're getting by at all. They certainly don't have the energy and the economic resources to push back, legally or otherwise.
Right. And a lot of times, the communities who are on the front lines of a lot of issues, but in this conversation, environmental injustice, they don't recognize that they're being targeted. And no one lets them know that there's about to be a coal terminal built through their city, and that there's town hall hearings where community members can speak up and say that they don't want this. They don't know that they have the power or the resources to be able to fight against these things or to even know about them.
Yeah, when you're living check to check and just trying to get by, you're not really watching the message boards for when the next activist meeting is, right? So, yeah, there are some unique challenges in that community. You also, and you've alluded to it in our conversation, the fact that you view the indigenous populations as also quite vulnerable. There's a lot going on with the indigenous populations in terms of trying to stare down big industry.
Yes. We saw it with the Dakota Access Pipeline. And, that is something that got a lot of publicity, but there is instances like that happen over and over and over again in indigenous communities that don't get broadcasted the way that did. And even in that case where it was broadcasted, there was so much violence and aggression against these people who are the protectors of this land that we stole. And I think it is so important in this movement to save the earth, to have indigenous voices be at the center of everything that we do, because they know how to care for the land. This is their land, and they've lived on it for far longer than anyone else here. And so to ignore them is to say that you don't actually want to save the world.
A great way to finish. If we had even a percentage of the sustainability consciousness that the indigenous peoples have, it would be a different world and a different place, the United States of America. Again, the movement is Youth versus Apocalypse. I mentioned Sunrise. That was just that one thing that you happen to be, but your movement is Youth versus Apocalypse, and it's youthversusapocalypse.org for more information. Wow, Isha Clarke, you're an inspiration, and I wish you the best. You're right. It should be the most important issue to us, and yet sometimes it's orphaned by the media and others. So again, thanks for joining us and good luck.
Thank you.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.